Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the BCS workshop, Legal 101 for Biotech. I'm Hunting from Biotech Connect Singapore, and I'll be the moderator for this webinar. In the next hour or so, we'll be embarking on our part 2 of the legal workshop series, specifically covering strategic partnerships to grow your biotech company. And thank you for joining us on your lunch break today. For those of you who are not familiar with BCS, we are a non-profit organization in Singapore with a mission to promote entrepreneurship across all healthcare sectors. And one of the ways we hope to do this is hosting a series of workshops where we bring in experts to discuss different aspects of startups and entrepreneurship. In this Legal 101 series, we'll be exploring some very fundamental aspect of any life science business, and that is legal agreements that are really crucial, not just in starting and running, but also growing your biotech company. To explain and demystify some of these legal agreements, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Lila Hope, partner at Cooley Law Firm, who will be the speaker for this series. So Lila has legally represented multiple life sciences companies across drug discovery, development, vaccines, medical device, diagnostics, and digital health. She specialized in transactions involving complex intellectual properties, businesses, operation, and legal issues, and have helped clients through the licensing, supply, distribution, clinical trials, research collaborations, and even vendor service agreements. She has been involved in over 20 IPOs and has been active in Asian biotech scene with over 18 transactions over the last 5 years. Cooley as a law firm is currently in its 100th year. It is the premier law firm for tech and life sciences company with over 1,100 lawyers across 16 offices. The firm has closed over 1,000 venture deals per year and is consistently ranked #1 in global licensing, IPO financing, transactions for life sciences and healthcare companies. Cooley Singapore was launched in early 2020, and they are able to advise on a full range of corporate matters. We also have tonight with us two of our panelists, Matt and Farish, who will be answering some of the questions in the Q&A session. We'd like to welcome Lila and thank you all of the partners from Cooley from joining us from California on your Monday night. The way this workshop will be run is Lila will have some slides to explain the different types of strategic partnership, and we have a short discussion after each one. So do add in your questions into the Q&A section. At the end of the presentation, we will also have some dedicated time to answer some general questions. So before we begin, we would like to run a really short poll to understand the background of our audience today.
Well, thank you, Han, and thank you, BCS, for inviting us to be here and to meet with all of you virtually. The topic of this presentation is biotech strategic alliances. If you were at the part 1 of this series, maybe 10 days ago, you know that we talked about all the smaller agreements that build up to this point of, a company in licensing its technology, doing research collaborations, and basically building up its pipeline and the products and the platform. And up to a point, I feel like this is, a time when the biotech company is going out into the world to basically showcase its product and platform technology and looking for a strategic partner. So it's a really important step in the biotech life cycle. It's typically a deal that's done, in a larger scale with more complexity and bringing in more revenue. So it's an important part of the biotech life cycle. So I think we'll spend the whole session on this and hopefully answer most of your questions. Next slide, please. So I think, as Han mentioned, Cooley has a worldwide coverage with lawyers in 16 different countries, but I just want to make sure that we highlight the point that our newest office in Singapore, right now already have 8 lawyers, and if I understand correctly, we're signing our first mega deal today. So that's in the life sciences transaction front. So that's really very exciting. We're here on the ground running and ready to help. Next slide, please. And I think Cooley, what's unique with us as compared to so many different law firms, there are lots of law firms in the world, obviously, is we have been doing life sciences for really decades, and in the life sciences space, we've been consistently ranked #1 all across different areas in terms of financing, capital market, corporate, licensing, transactional work, patent, and so forth. So I think we really kind of build up our practice and our platform to be a one-stop shop for our biotech clients to meet all of their legal needs. Next slide, please. So talking about strategic alliances, I think the concept is not really novel. Even in the olden times, folks recognize that countries need to trade with each other, people need to barter goods, and to form alliances really make everyone stronger and offer services or goods to each other that the other person does not have. Next slide, please.
So
And
perhaps, sorry,
yes.
is probably a good time. We can poll the audience about the areas that they are in, so we can have a better idea of what kind of partnership they're looking at.
Yeah, please.
So it does seems like we have a lot more people in biotech cell gene therapy and a fair number of people in biotech drug discovery in the audience today.
Great. So I'll make sure that I touch on all those interesting areas. So I think this is just the timeline that we shared last time for folks who weren't here a week ago. Really, when a biotech company have its life cycle, it starts out with in-licensing, research licenses, product in-licenses, collaborations, a lot of smaller manufacturing and services type of contracts. And then at some point in its life cycle, it's ready to go into corporate partnering and product collaborations. So this is what we're talking about today. Next slide, please. So we'll start out by just kind of maybe laying out the different types of alliances. I think the one that probably most people are familiar with is a product license. If you have a compound that's either almost ready for IND filing or in the clinic, a lot of times people go out and partner the program. And why do you do that? Because number one, a lot of biotech companies don't have the funds or don't have the resources to go all the way by themselves to, sometimes phase 3 registration trials are, basically are large and involve hundreds of millions of dollars or, involve, many patients and a lot of money to develop the product. So at some point in the life cycle, the biotech company would partner the product with a pharma company from resource perspective, but also the pharma a lot of times have regulatory experience or the experience to take the product all the way to the finish line and may have a lot of input also into the launch of a product, the manufacturing that's necessary for commercial launch, and also commercial capabilities such as distribution channels, medical affair departments, promotion, sales force that the biotech may not have. So there are a lot of reasons a biotech may take its product at certain life cycle and to go out and partner with a company. So the product licenses, one traditional type of product licenses that we used to do a lot 10 years ago are straight licenses. I would grant an exclusive license as a biotech company to a pharma, and I would receive an upfront payment, milestone payments. I would receive a royalty. I have some oversight on a joint steering committee to comment on what the pharma is doing to provide some input. I will not have final decision-making authority on anything because the pharma is paying for everything and it's paid for the program. So I've kind of given up my control. I have some diligence obligations as to what the pharma can do or cannot do with my product, but by and large, it's a straight out license. It's really I'm transferring most of the decision-making authority and the rights of the product to the pharma partner. And a different type of product license where the biotech is more involved are profit share type of arrangements, and we're seeing that more and more. And today everyone wants some kind of a profit share component, and we'll get into that in a little more detail later on. And sometimes you hear the terminology COCO, it's a COCO agreement or 50-50 agreement. Those are all referring to profit share type of arrangements. So product license is when you have a product. Platform collaboration, what does that mean? Platform collaboration a lot of times involves two companies, and oftentimes two biotech companies who have platform technologies. I could have a piece of platform technology that have, for example, a viral vector for delivering drug into patients through my viral vector. And you may have a technology that actually are some transgenes that I can introduce into the vector that make the viral vector more potent or lasting longer or have fewer side effects. And we each for ourselves, we can basically use our platform technology to develop products. But if we combine it together, it would be much more powerful or much more desirable. So we may want to do a platform deal to collaborate and see what's the potential of using our technology side by side. So that's one example of a platform collaboration. So another set of kind of activity is a discovery and an option agreement. Discovery and option agreement basically means that I have a platform, for example, using the, basically using the let's just say I have an oncolytic virus platform where the virus can go in and lyse tumor. A pharma company can come to me and say, hey, that's very interesting. I have 5 tumor targets that potentially I want to test, which each is directed to a particular tumor type. Can you make for me 5 sets of oncolytic viruses, each containing 1 transgene, so that I can do some assays on it, do some studies on it, do some preclinical studies on it, and then decide if I want to exercise the option and basically acquire commercial rights to these products to develop further. So that's a discovery and option agreement. They come in different flavors. It could be a cell therapy. I know, maybe 20% of you are in the cell therapy field. It's very common when the pharma to come over and say, hey, I'm interested in a particular tumor type. I'm focusing on a certain type of targets, or I'm focused on neoantigens. Can we do a deal together and using your platform technology, and maybe we can discover some products together. So, so that's a very, very common, but it's often coupled. These things I'm listing out as 3 different sets, but what it really is a lot of times these are coupled together in one big conglomerate deal, right? So with the discovery and option agreement, typically pharma doesn't come to you when you have a platform that's unproven. A lot of times in combination with those deals, the biotech had already developed its platform in its own lead product. That lead product could be at the IND stage or could be in clinical trials. So a lot of times the discovery and option deal would have a component that's a license or an option, or a license, a lot of time license to the lead program. So you would have a product license and the discovery and option program all combined in one deal. And that's very, very typical. In the platform, collaboration is often a part of the discovery and option project too. If you're an antibody company and you have a particular type of platform for antibody discovery, and you can do a high throughput screen and discover antibodies in a very effective manner, and the pharma who is trying to partner with you and run a discovery and option deal with you to say, I'm going to give you 5 different targets. I keep saying 5 because a lot of deals are done with 5 targets. 5 targets, and you can run your antibody high throughput screening program for me and discover novel antibodies for me that has features that I really want to see in an antibody. And then, but in the meantime, I also, for example, I'm a pharma and I have some antibody technology in the FC domain, or I have some bispecific technology, or I have something that I want to contribute in the platform too. And that's something, sometimes that can be done to say, okay, I'm going to exercise my option and take what you have made and I will do my engineering in-house. But sometimes that engineering step is so integral to the discovery stage that the pharma would say, let's do that first part even together. So it's essentially a platform collaboration of putting 2 platform technologies together in the context of discovery and option deal. So I'm just saying all these different things tend to all work together depending on the technology, depending on the scenario, depending on who what's what. So there are many different ways of doing these deals, and we can be very flexible and creative about it.
So in terms of, I mean, all these different ones you're saying that they're quite flexible. So does it mean that there's no fixed pattern? Like, do platform collaboration tend to happen earlier? Does product licenses tend to happen at a later stage? It's in terms of like the timeline you showed earlier, do you see a kind of like a rough pattern, or it's really kind of really depends on the founder and the management of the biotech?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think to your first question, every deal is different. The one type of deal that probably is the most consistent, so to speak, is the straight license. And we see so few straight licenses these days. And every deal I do these days, maybe not every, but more than 50% of the deal I do have some fancy feature to it, right? So are much rarer now, unless it's a regional deal. So I think each deal is different, and that's why it's important to kind of brainstorm early on and kind of talk about, happy to always have a chat with anyone who have something in mind as to how to structure these deals. One of my friend used to say, one of my lawyer friends used to say, the first call is always free. So, feel free to give us a call and we can chat about it. And I think from a timeline perspective, you don't need much to do a platform collaboration. So maybe that's why I tend to be earlier. I have a platform, I want to see how it works with other type of things. You can do that pretty much from the beginning. In order to do a product license, your product has to be mature enough. In order to do a discovery and an option deal, you have to have shown some proof of concept in order for the discovery and option deal to take place. And typically farmers don't plunk down a huge chunk of money unless they have seen some proof of concept in a product. And then, they'll either take the product with it, or they'll say, I'm not interested in that particular product. And I don't want to commit to funding a development program for that particular product, but it showed me enough potential so that I'll do a discovery option deal with you. So that's why the product license and the discovery and option deals tend to be a little bit later. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the product licenses first. Let's talk about the straight license. I made it sound like straight licenses are very simple and not very exciting, but they also have some trick and magic to it. And I think there are a lot that you need to think about. People typically, when you do a product license, it's because the product is really valuable and the program is running really well. So someone is coming to you not for your platform, but for the product itself. In that particular case, when the product is valuable to a potential partner, it's also very valuable for yourself. So you need to make sure that whoever you give the product to would actually develop it, move it forward, and do justice to the program that you've done so far. So the scope of the product license, I think, are vary, right? So they're worldwide deals, and a lot of times they're regional deals, especially for Asian companies. I think for the longest time, the Asian companies typically in-license rights from a biotech company or a pharma company less for pharma company, but mostly another biotech company for Asian rights, regional rights. That's typically done as a straight license. Nowadays, we also see Asian companies having innovative drug product that are out licensed to the pharma company. So, the deals we're seeing are now going the other direction as well. But I think, in those deals, there's a regional component to it because the Asian company tend to want to retain regional rights for itself and just out-license ex-Asia rights to a pharma partner. So, the scope can also be limited at a molecule level. Sometimes it's just a drug product, and sometimes it's the entire program. And how do you define the entire program is very interesting because you could define the molecules. If it's a small molecule, it could be small molecule plus other molecules with the same scaffold for people who, those of us who are biochemists, in our prior life, we all understand the scaffolds and the SARS and all that kind of stuff. It could be defined as a series of compounds, a particular compounds under particular patent application, but it could also be molecules that basically are targeting to a particular target or have a particular mechanism of action or sharing a particular binding site. For antibodies, I think it's more of a target-based approach in terms of how you define the program, but sometimes it could also be defined as, programs are defined as antibodies that's directed to a particular epitope. And then, from a cell therapy perspective, I think that's even more complex, right? You can approach a different tumor type, but you can approach a tumor type in many different ways. So again, it's probably more of a target-based approach, but there's more combinatorial features going on because now you're basically able to put multiple features into one therapy. So with the scope, some people say, okay, do I split things by indication? I think it's very difficult to do an indication split deal. I try to talk everybody out of it who comes to me, and I try not to do an indication split deal myself because what I know is, in 6 months or a year or 2 years, someone is going to call me and say, this is not working, what had just happened? So I try to talk you out of it from up front. That's partly because it's very hard to track sales in indication in many countries. The doctors can prescribe across different indications. So even if you get approval for a drug for one particular indication, someone gets it for another indication, you tend to cross sale, and then people, step on each other's toes. Exceptions for those are drugs that can be licensed in a specific form or formulation that is readily distinguishable. If we were doing this in person, I would ask people if you have an example, but now I can't, so I have to say everything myself. One example would be eye drops, right? If you have a drug that's that it can be taken systemically for a chronic disease, but can be also used as an eye drop, there's very little chance that there is going to be a mix of sales. I'm not going to open up a big bottle of eye drop and gobble it down. I would just take a pill. Sorry, I'm hearing some echo. Also, I guess, another different place where the indication split might happen is now in the cell therapy state, because in cell therapy, not only are you talking about different targets and so forth, sometimes I think you can also talk about cell therapy for a particular indication on top of the target limitation. I would still not use indication as the sole differentiator, but that could be another layer as to how you split up the world. So in a typical product license, what do you retain as a licensor? You grant a license, and most of the time it's an exclusive license because people want exclusive product rights for a particular field in a particular territory, and it's for a particular set of molecules. So what rights do you retain? A lot of times you retain R&D rights and early stage, and R&D rights is just, I need to be able to use these molecules in my internal R&D activities. A lot of times I think licensor wants to retain early stage clinical development activities because the licensee, the pharma, typically fund the development program. This is a good way for the licensor to build up its internal cleanup activity if this is your lead compound based on the pharma's money. And then once you have that capability up and running and so forth, you hand over. Typically, pharma will want to take over when it's phase 2 or at least phase 2B, right? Phase 2B registration, they want to do it in-house and have total control over that. But by then, you've already got your clinical team built up using the money proceeds or whatever reimbursement that you receive under this agreement. Sometimes licensor wants to retain the right to co-promote. And typically that's in a country where the licensor has operations. I would try to discourage anyone who wants a worldwide co-promotional deal, because you're not going to build a worldwide sales force, and there's really no point doing that. A lot of my US clients want to retain co-promotional rights in the US, and if you're an Asian company, you can consider doing that in Asian countries. Sometimes the licensor wants to retain manufacturing rights, and sometimes that's because a level of control, because you have certain manufacturing technology, especially in the antibody or cell therapy field, that you want to retain as a trade secret. So you don't want to give that right to your licensee or do a tech transfer or anything like that. You want to keep that yourself. Especially in cell therapy, like basically the manufacturing is very much coupled with the cell differentiation, expansion, stimulation, right? So to be able to transfer manufacturing technology is essentially teaching people how to make the type of T cells or NK cells that you want. And sometimes it's just because you want to build up a manufacturing facility and you want to retain some manufacturing rights. And again, it's because everything that licensor is down for licensee, licensor is down for licensee under straight product license is fully covered and reimbursed by the licensee. This is again an opportunity to build up your infrastructure at some level without, basically using on the farmer's payroll, right? So, they'll never pay you to build up a facility and to do, capital expenditure activities, but they will, fund your FTE cost and so forth. Licensees obligations, what does the pharma typically sign up for? There's always payment. Upfront milestone royalties are typical. If you're a university, you can expect some sublicense revenue, which is if the licensee sublicenses, you'll get a cut of that. If you are a biotech company doing a deal with pharma, sublicense revenue is uncommon. Diligence obligations, commercially reasonable efforts is the typical standard, and we typically want something a little more than commercially reasonable effort because it's a standard that's easy to meet, even though sometimes it's commercially reasonable to go very slow. Sometimes it's commercially reasonable to be not to be not doing very much. So specific will be negotiated. Oftentimes we want the licensee to sign up for some exclusivity obligations. And why is that? Because when we give a molecule to a pharma company, we really want them to focus on it. We want that to be their best shot on goal. We want that to be their favorite program for this particular approach. Sometimes we want target exclusivity, mechanism of action, because we don't want them to be running two competing programs against the same target and have two modalities that's racing side by side of each other, and eventually they take one forward. You don't want your product to be in that kind of a horse race for them internally. It's easier to get target and mechanism of action exclusivity. It's not easy, but it is easier than indication therapeutic area. I think it's very difficult for someone to sign on to say, you are my one shot on goal in lung cancer or in small cell lung cancer. It's just people don't do that typically. I put it in there because it's something that you can think about in some particular cases. For example, in smaller areas such as eye disease, right? You could have an indication, exclusivity on this is the iron treatment. This is the only iron treatment you're gonna do. So that could potentially happen. There is a very important part of the product license agreement, which is governance. What that means is you'll form a joint committee, you'll have alliance managers. That's a place for information exchange, for decision making. A lot of time in a straight license, the pharma would have final decision making, but there would be an escalation process. You'll hear about what they're trying to do. You have a chance to discuss it at the committee level. If you disagree, then it's going to be escalated to the senior officers. And when the senior officers disagree, then there will be some final decision making. But at least you have a chance to convince them of your viewpoint. So that's an important part of these licenses. Next slide, please.
There's one quick question from the audience. With regards to you mentioned about the sub licenses. So Srinivas was interested to ask, when a biotech startup licenses an IP from academia at an early stage, what would be a reasonable revenue sharing split with the original licensor if the biotech sub-licenses the IP after further development to a third party? Is it usual?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah. Is it usual to see sub-licensing royalties split to be dependent on the stage where the asset is sub-licensed, or something different?
Yeah, so typically university will build in a clause in their license agreement to say, if you grant a sub-license, I'll receive X amount of revenue. I'll receive a certain percentage. And that ranges all the way from 0, 5, 10, 15%. And sometimes we see as high as 30%. And that's typically done in an incremental stepwise fashion, right? If you take the license and you flip it the next day without doing anything, that typically is the highest amount. It could range from anywhere from 20, 25 to 30%. If you take things forward a little bit, and I'll explain what that means, it could go down to 20% or 15%. And then as it goes further, it can go 10, 5, or 0, right? So some universities say, I'll never go to 0, and some are willing to go down to 0. And that could be measured by a number of different things. One is the time, 2 years, 4 years, 6 years. And one is the stage of development. If you sub-license at the time when your product is in clinic, that's one thing. If you sub-license after, a different time, it's another thing. And I think it's just that's always negotiated. And, different universities may have different expectations, but whoever asked that question is correct, that it is done in a stepwise fashion depending on how much work you had put in-house. But it's I can't give a number without actually knowing the situation. So product licenses, profit share. So a lot of the similar attributes, because it is an exclusive license, you think about what's the scope of the license and so forth. But what's different here is, instead of saying, I'm going to license the program to you, you're paying for everything now. The licensor is agreeing to pay X% of the development cost. And in exchange, it's receiving X% of the profit, or loss, right? If the product is being sold as a loss, especially at the time of launch, you would be basically bearing X% of the loss at launch as well. So that could be done, in, again, many different ways. Sometimes the profit share is purely a financial play. It's just a co-funding type of arrangement. You're paying for X% of the development cost. The farmer is doing all the work, and you're just sitting at home and collecting X% of the profit. Sometimes the licensor, because the biotech, because they're doing that, they would have some operational responsibility. They could have a lead role in certain indications to say that, okay, you're developing these big mega indications. There's some niche indications that I'm interested in, I will be developing. And because I'm paying X% of the development cost, you will know that I'm not doing it frivolously. I'm actually, putting my efforts in and being efficient about it. Sometimes it's manufacturing responsibility. We talked about that. Sometimes the biotech wants some commercial responsibility. We already talked about co-promote. Co-promote is very common in a profit share situation, but sometimes the biotech said, I want to do some medical affairs. And occasionally the biotech would even say that I want to, have some say in some of your actual commercial arrangements. I think the pharma is very unlikely to give biotech any real commercial, operational responsibilities, such as distribution or obviously you can't have two party booking sales, only one party can book sales, but then warehousing and all that kind of stuff, because the farm already have it in place, and it just doesn't make sense at all to have two supply chains. But there are, medical affairs activities and KOL activities, key opinion leader activities, and also promotional activities that the biotech can participate in. Sometimes it could be a regional responsibility, right? To say that, okay, I will do co-promotion in one particular country. The cost and profit sharing can be done on a worldwide basis or regional basis. I think a lot of times for my US clients, they will do it just a US cost profit sharing, because it's defined and what's the typical cost, basically cost benefit analysis, versus if you actually do a worldwide cost and profit sharing. In a lot of countries, the cost of development or launch is pretty high, but there's not a whole lot of margin in the product. So I think that's another consideration, and things can be done. And the key negotiation on this is budget. How many times can the budget be changed? The pharma probably want decision making, but how quickly can you change the budget? How do you give me cash flow protection? Can I opt in, or can I opt out, or can I opt down to go from 50% to 25% if the program really gets too expensive and I need to spend money somewhere else? So all of these are negotiated, and and obviously make this type of agreement a little more complicated and takes more time to negotiate. Next slide, please. So next, we're moving into platform collaborations. And this is actually my favorite type of agreement. If I can spend all night talking about it, I will, because it is very technology heavy. and I love technology, and I love to hear about what everyone doing. So inevitably, the platform collaborations are the richest in terms of people putting technology with each other's, technologies, putting technologies together, and that's when the real innovation and creative juice are going, and it's just very, very exciting. So I think that's no wonder that a lot of scientific founders, or a lot of companies get into platform collaborations very early on, because people are just excited about these kind of things, and it's you can do it very early. So who is doing what? So in platform collaboration, I ask myself these questions because they're critical questions. And if you're coming to me to talk about a platform deal, this is the question I'm going to have to ask you before we get down to a term sheet. So who is doing what? Who is performing what? Are you sending me your samples so that I can do something at my company, or I'm sending you something and you're doing it there, or we all sending it to a third party? So the who is doing what part is actually critically important, because it involves information technology transfer and material transfer from the outset, right? So whatever is your platform is your crown jewel. It's the thing that differentiates yourself from anybody else in the world. It's something that you think you can do better than anyone else in the world. And now you're going to transfer the materials, transfer the cell lines, or teach someone else how to do it. Are you comfortable with that? If not, don't do it. Have that part of the activity that's critical for you being done in-house with yourself, so that your technology never leaves the door. And the other part that's critically important is typically the invention is owned, unless the agreement otherwise provides. Typically the invention is owned by the party who generates the invention. So you don't want improvement to your technology to be actually generated by the other party, unless we negotiate IP provisions that will help you, and we almost always do. But still, it just feels a little better for your kid to be born in your own house rather than somebody else's house, and you have to bring them back, right? So this is just a very critical piece, and you want to think through this very carefully. And obviously your partner has exactly the same concerns. So we can't be all self-centered here. We have to think about being a good partner and kind of making things work for them as well. Who is paying for what? Typically, if two biotech are doing platform collaboration, everybody just bear their own cost, unless there's a huge disparity. One party is doing all the work and the other party isn't. And then maybe they're splitting the cost a little bit. The who is paying for what is really tied to the next point, which is, if it works, who has rights to what, right? So, we can put the two platform technology pieces together. If it works, one of us may say, okay, this and these two things work really well together. I want to take it into neurostimulation field, and the other one may say, oh, I want to take it into oncology field. I don't even know if there's something that works in both fields. But if we actually have a different orientation of the company, then we can do it that way. Or if we develop a new technology that actually is applicable to your platform and my platform, then each one can use it for their own platform, to develop their own platform. So I think this doesn't have to be either or doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. You could be creating something that broadens the product opportunity for both parties, and it doesn't have to always end up in the hands of one particular party. And then the question is, what if it doesn't work? We tried this for 6 months, a year, 2 years, and we said this really doesn't really work. That's fine too, right? We can stop the platform collaboration. And in that case, we need to say who can use the results of the agreement for what. And if on the outside we go into what we say is, okay, we'll put it together, and if it works, we'll both be able to use it, and we'll pay each other some consideration for using it, like a small royalty or anything, right? If then we want to make sure that people just don't say, oh, it doesn't work, and walk away, and can still use the technology and just without the payment obligation. So when it doesn't work, there are two things that you need to make sure. One is people don't just say it doesn't work and walk away and still enjoy the benefit of the collaboration without making the necessary payments. And the other part is, you don't want to say it doesn't work, we go away, we never enter into a big broad agreement. We did the platform collaboration, but all of a sudden there's blocking IP generated everywhere, and people filed broadly, and the blocking IP is blocking either of the parties or both parties from fulfilling the full potential of their platform. So I think that's just, you know, again, whenever you put your platform into play, those are, you know, massively important questions. And then there's another part that's exclusivity. Okay, I am having a coating, you are having a stent. We're trying to develop a technology to see how I can apply this particular coating to the stent that works really well. So medical devices, I keep forgetting about the med devices folks, but now I remember there's some med devices folks here. So, you know, the coating on the stent is really important. The stent company is putting in a fair bit of R&D in order to apply the coating to a stent in a way that's safe, you know, durable, and all that kind of stuff. When you do the work, you have the stent, you have some IP that's combo IP in some ways. You want to make sure that that coating company doesn't say, oh, that's great, let me take all the data and all your inventions and all of your investment of this project, and I'll do it immediately with other stent companies, and so they can do exactly the same thing. So the stent company can be a little bit selfish and say, hey, look, I did this so that my stent can be better than everybody else's. I used your coating technology. I worked out how these two can be put together. I want a period of exclusivity. It could be forever. It could be for 5 years. It could be until my product is on the market for 2 or 3 years or 5 years, so that I give myself enough of a head start as compared to other companies, because before they can do exactly the same thing with your coating technology. Don't just go teach the next stent company to do exactly the same thing, right? So I think, but that's usually negotiated as well, right? So there are different kinds of stent. Are you just talking about, you know, stents into the heart, stents into the vessels, stents into whatever? Am I blocked out of everything, or just things that are directly competitive to you? So the exclusivity provision, if any, it would be, you know, heavily negotiated, and it's a two-edged sword, right? If I go and negotiate an exclusivity with the coating company can say that, hey, I don't want you to be using any other coating. I want you to just use my coating, because I'm working with you on a lot of these things, and I'm your test case. I don't want you to just ditch my. So it's just a complicated, but that's what makes this really fun. So that's platform collaboration, and I'm going to move on to the discover and optional deals, and because those are really interesting, and those are being done a lot. And a lot of the times when you say $200 million upfront, it is a discovery and option deal, and those deals are being done. Like, those are some of the more exciting, challenging, but really, really interesting deals. So let's go to that for a minute. Next slide, please. Oh, I missed that bit. No, let's go back for a second. So, yeah, so a lot of times I need to tell people platform collaborations are done because the founders or the scientists in the two companies are friends. You knew each other from school, you're friends from, you know, whatever. And the two people talk to each other at the dinner table and say, oh, I'm doing this, can we put our stuff together and do a platform collaboration together? Because they realize the synergy before the platform is, you know, widely known or widely publicized. And that's the time when you really want to be careful, because you're friends and you want to be still friendly when you do a collaboration together. So that's why I said, you know, we can't be too selfish, even though, you know, being your lawyer, I'm naturally wanting to preserve your interests, but a lot of times I just think we need to be thoughtful about this, because both parties are putting their best assets together. Next slide, please. Discovery and option deals. Scope of the discovery collaboration. So what are the things that we think about? So discovery and option deals, you know, by and large, it's got the components. The flow chart would be discovery program, right? This is the time when the product candidates are built and tested, and essentially proof of concept studies are run, the product is being configured, you throw whatever transgenes you throw whatever CAR into your T cells or NK cells, you built it up in that stage. That's the discovery collaboration, and you test it enough for there to be enough information for the farmer to say, I'm exercising the option, or I'm leaving it behind and not exercising the option. And then there's the option exercise. So that's discovery and option. After option is very much just like a product license that we've talked about before. There could be product license. just straight product license, that's a profit share scenario after the option exercise or combination. So so that's the different components, the head, the neck, and the body of the discovery and option deal. So we're going to focus on the discovery piece, because post option we've talked about already in the product licenses. The discovery piece is interesting because you have to define what's the scope of the discovery collaboration. The pharma, there's nothing they like more than using a biotech company as their outside pipeline laboratory. And that's not what you want to do with a pharma company, because you want to be innovative for your own purposes, for your own programs. You don't want to become the outside cheap R&D department of a pharma company. So you need to define the scope of the collaboration really carefully. How many targets? How many cell lines you want me to make? How many viral constructs you want me to make? How many things you want me to test? Do you want me to stop at the R&D enabling study stage or the IND filing stage? You really need to understand. Ideally, you would say, okay, I wanted this to be 4 years or 5 years. At our mutual agreement, we can extend it, or if I've passed a certain stage, I just need to finish some work, I'll extend it. But I'm not gonna keep sitting here and try to innovate all the time. If for some reason, some things don't work out, or I only ended up with 1 candidate when you wanted 3, I have to be done at some point. So the scope of the discovery collaboration is very important. The pharma would always want the right to swap targets. They never can make up their mind. They'll come with 5 targets and say, I have the right to swap them. So you want to make sure your discovery collaboration does not start with a 5-target collaboration, and by the time you're done, you've tested 25 targets. So how many times can they swap the target? When can they swap the target? If the program is 4 years long, can they still do it at year 3? If, does it cost them to swap targets? What if they swap targets and that target, you already have an internal program, you're developing that target? Do they just get whatever you've done for free? And, and another really important piece is you don't want to block yourself from doing another deal. So in order to do that, you have to be able to go out with other people and work on other targets. So when the pharma comes to and want to swap target, and the target they want now is a target that you're working with a third party, you have to be able to say no. So the right to swap target is pretty ubiquitous in discovery and option deals, but we need to be very smart about it and make sure that that does not become a nightmare for you to manage your platform, or foreclose your opportunities to work on targets internally or with other collaborators. So the option to candidate, I think we talked about that already, which is, what's the timing, what are the criteria? Everyone wants to have criteria for option to target. At the end of the day, I think that we need to look at the criteria with a grain of salt, because, what the farmers always say is, if it meets the criteria, I still want the right to not take it because it is an option. If it doesn't meet the criteria, I still want the right to take it. Because if it's just missing it by a little bit, it may still be good enough for me, and I don't want to spend all this money and not have the right to take it. So at the end of the day, the criteria is there as a little bit of a goalpost to say, okay, these are the criteria I'm working towards. I know this is what you're evaluating internally to make a decision, go, no go. So I'm going to work towards that. I'm going to try to hit it as closely as possible. And that also defines my scope of work, because this is the bucket of things that I need to generate data on in order to convince you to take the program. But it's not a hard and fast criteria. It's not a black and white pass, no pass. So I think that's just an important thing to keep in mind and be flexible about that. Timing, that's important. You don't want to keep working at this together all the time. You don't want that goalpost to be moved. You don't want to be doing work and and thinking that you've hit the right time, but not really. What happens to the rejected candidates? A lot of times the rejected candidates just goes into no man's land. The pharma can't do anything about it. Biotech cannot do anything about it. Partly because when pharma comes to you with a target, they want something for that target, and they have internal programs, they have approaches that they want to do. They want to see if your particular modality is going to be good for that target. And if it doesn't work as well as they think, they're still going to advance their internal. If they come to you for a cell therapy approach, they still have an antibody therapy approach internally, and they don't want to just all of a sudden enable you to compete. And a lot of times the rejected target actually has a small piece of pharma DNA in it, right? So if they come to you for a CAR T program, they could be bringing the antigen binding domain. They could be bringing in their own fragments. So your rejected target actually has a proprietary component of the pharma company. So you can't just get an automatic license to it. So that's complicated. But sometimes we negotiate to get the rights to rejected candidates. Sometimes it's an option, sometimes it's a right of negotiation. Sometimes we just have it outright to say, hey, we're doing 4, you're taking 3. I get the last one, and that's just part of the deal. And again, what, you know, a lot of this negotiation, you know, is all part and parcel of what value the pharma is thinking they're getting to you, how much money they pay you upfront, and how much money they pay you to do these projects. And if the more they pay, the more they feel like they own you. The less they pay, or the more you are, you know, putting in your stuff upfront, the more you can say, okay, I need to get something out of this besides just the, you know, cash you're paying me upfront. So the next question seems obvious, but it's not. What is a platform and what is included? Okay, what is a platform? Everybody's got their platform. I could have a cell therapy platform. I could have an antibody platform. I could have a whatever platform. But the platform is only a concept. What technology is included in the platform? I signed the deal today with a pharma. I have a platform that's today. Everything is included that's in my platform today. 2 years from now, in the middle of the discovery program, I in-license some technology from a university that carries a 1% or 2% royalty burden that is a particular feature to the cell therapy that makes it stealth, that makes it increases longevity, or whatever it does to the cell therapy that makes it less immunogenic or more immunogenic, whatever it is, right? It carries a 2% royalty. It's part of an improvement to my platform. Through in-licensing activity during the research term, is that automatically included to the license granted to the pharma, and is it for free? So that has to be negotiated. Otherwise, the more you improve your technology, the more you in-license stuff, the smaller your margin is on what profit you're getting from this program. So who bears the risk of IP infringement? And that's a hotly negotiated topic as well. The pharma would say, you're a platform company, you bear the risk of everything that's for your platform. But in reality, we can't bear all the risk to our platform. A lot of times that's difficult. Many people use CRISPR for engineering, and everyone knows how hard it is to get a CRISPR license. I think everyone is sitting there waiting for something to happen to the whole CRISPR world so that they can finally get some clarity. You cannot bear risk on CRISPR, use of CRISPR in the engineering of these cell lines. For the pharma, you have to negotiate at least to try to get rid of that. So it's not so easy an answer as to what bears, who bears the risk for IP infringement. And yeah, the last point we already talked about, once it's optional, it's just treated as a product deal. Next slide, please. Oh, yes, my cartoon. Yeah, so this is on the timing part. I've already talked about this. It's a 1-year timer, gives an added sense of urgency to my research grant. I think having some timeline to the research collaboration, give both parties some incentive to meet that timeline instead of just a project-based or a research plan-based time frame. It's nice to have some definitive timeline. Okay, next one, please. Oh, next one is me. I think I'm done.
So one of the questions that it seems to have popped up quite a bit from all your presentation, Lila, is that it seems like the playing field is a little bit level against like a early stage or newly developed early stage company. With so little experience in such deals, how do you actually know what to look up for, to make sure that when we are discussing a potential agreement, especially when you talk about the discovery and option, how do we make sure that we are protecting ourselves and not to tip the favor too much in the big pharma, because it's quite challenging.
Yeah, it is very challenging. I think by definition, when you're trying to do a big pharma deal, they are waving a lot of cash in front of you. So, and with small biotech companies, you both want the cash, you want the validation, you want to be able to announce that now I'm doing a discovery deal with a big pharma company. So a lot of companies are really willing to give up a lot to get a deal done. I'd say that if this is your first platform deal, there are two important pieces. One is economics, and the economics is important partly because you're setting a tone as to what, you know, what it is that your market, your worth in the market in terms of, you know, comps that you're setting up for yourself. But that is less critical than the piece to say what it is that you need to make sure that you don't block yourself from doing. So I think the biggest issues in that I see in platform deals is not that I got too little for this deal, is I gave up too much for this deal. If you carved out an entire indication, if you all of a sudden just said that you're not going to go into a particular field, that is a problem. If you allow the pharma to swap targets for 3 years without any kind of restriction and say, basically, you'll bring me whatever targets you have, I work for it for you. You cannot do another deal in 3 years because you could accidentally work on a target, because you can't promise anyone any target anymore. So to me, the you know, the economics is important. The deal for that piece is important, but even more important is what have you signed up that you've given up that you can't, you know, because the more important thing is to be able to have your internal program and do another deal.
So related to that, does it mean that the pharma company can protect its target, prevent you as a platform company from working on the target in the future, or is this something like you want to like kind of like, you know, when you're negotiating, kind of like make sure that doesn't happen? Because you mentioned like blocking IPs and things like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of times target exclusivity exists. It's just a matter of for how long. For example, if they don't exercise the option, that exclusivity has to burn off, right? Because they came to you with a target and say, do something for me. You made some product candidates for the pharma company. They didn't exercise the option. They did not move it forward. So that's fine. But then you should not be bound by target exclusivity anymore. That has to go away either immediately or shortly thereafter. But if they exercise the option and they now have a product that has that target in it, that's your product, and they're paying you huge sums of milestones and royalties, then probably they don't want you to make a similar product for another for another pharma company. So I think in that case, it's reasonable for the exclusivity to extend longer depending on how much they pay you. So I think that just varies. I think while you're working on a target discovery deal on a particular target with a pharma, it's very rare. I don't think, you know, I've done a deal, especially the big deals, that you can work on the same target for someone else. So there is some exclusivity that's upfront.
So we have another question, which is a little bit more specific. Like, so what is the typical type of alliances for like a medical robotics startup? Is there a particular one that it tends to happen?
Yeah, medical robotics is kind of interesting. I think a lot of times with devices, people build it in-house, you know, to a certain point, and then when they go out and do a partnering deal, they're really looking for someone who can kind of sponsor the clinical trial phase, or the manufacturing, the mass production phase, and the, you know, the commercial phase. So I feel like in the device field, people tend to partner at a more mature time, when the product is already built up or tested, and then you look for a, you know, a device company to potentially purchase the product rights for a particular region or worldwide. The early stage deals, I think there are platform deals to be done, right? And there are collaboration to be done even at the discovery stage. For example, you know, I think a lot of deals I see tend to be with hospitals and with, but those are more like a clinical trial, clinical type of development activities. So they're a subset of alliances or collaborations. You know, I guess you can do platform type of deals to say that, hey, I have a robotic device, I do certain things, but I'm, you know, but someone else has a really awesome algorithm or something that can be worked together with my device, and then we do a collab. So I license that. That's possible as well. I'll have to give this some thought, but you know, whoever asked the question, if I didn't completely answer it, I'm happy to chat offline.
So When the other thing I guess that's maybe more fundamental is when, as a biotech, do you actually think about engaging partners for potential alliances? And how do your clients actually find these interested other parties? Because I know you
Uh,
mentioned for platform collaboration, it's like people who know each other, but what about the other deals that you talked about?
yeah, the product deals, I think people start thinking about that. It really depends. I think a lot of times people look at their, there are companies who partner products that are in phase 2, right? There are companies who partner products that are preclinical. So, I think it really depends on whether you feel like, okay, I still have enough cash. I want to move the product forward a little bit, because it really is a little bit like a house. You buy a piece of land, it's relatively cheap. You build the frame and you never finished it, it's going to be, more value but still not full potential. You build it up but you never put in the nice appliances, it's one thing, but the more you develop it, the incremental gain that you have in terms of value realization is a lot higher, for two reasons. One is it's just more finished and people, it's, you sell more, but more importantly, it's more de-risked, right? So if you take it, if you're partnering at the IND enabling stage, you don't know if you're going to file an IND. If you filed an IND, you have enough for an IND, you'll get an IND through, it's a clinical stage compound. If you've done phase 1, or at least the initial studies, when you put it into a patient, you won't kill anyone. So each step along the way, you've de-risked the program, and the incremental gain you get in terms of value creation is very high. So the further along you can take the program, the better. But a lot of time people partner their lead program because they have 2 or 3 follow-on programs that are really promising. So if you partner your lead program, you get a lot of money, and then you don't have to go out and raise money and get diluted. And then you can focus on these other programs. It's kind of like selling your firstborn child in order to raise the other ones. So you kind of work it out. I think a lot depends on and how you approach those people. You give presentations, right? A lot of times the opportunity comes to you. You give a presentation at at ASCO or at ASH or whatever, you talk about it, and people will approach you and say, well, I'm interested, I want. And a lot of times people say they're interested, they look at it, they diligence, they talk about it, and it's years before they actually pull the trigger to say, I want to do a deal with you, because they're evaluating a lot of other programs in a similar space for a similar target. And so I think it never hurts to talk to people early. I have clients who had maintained connection or conversation with people for a year or two before their program get partnered. And that's because over a year or two, they build the relationship. They know the BD people, they know the people who are the scouting folks from the pharma. They know this people runs this program, that people run that program. You are familiar with them. They know your program. They know what you're working on. They've watched you deliver over a period of time, even it's in the preclinical or early clinical stage. So they know you've always met your goals, right? So then they basically can form opinion and tell a story when they pitch it internally. So I don't think it's ever too early to talk to people about it, unless it's a secret program. But when you actually pull the trigger and partner it is when you feel like you're getting the value.
So I see that we're running a little bit over. Maybe I will end with one question, which is not directly related, which I think was quite interesting. It was a registration question. What was actually your motivation? And I know you covered this in the first workshop. What was actually your motivation to shift to the legal space after having established such a strong background in biology?
Oh, I that's a bit embarrassing because it took me 6 years to do my PhD, and my thesis project I only started in the 4th year. I just realized that number one, I was not very good at bench science. I was very impatient. I always do too many things at the same time and end up messing something up. And also, I just didn't like the idea that I could spend 4 years on a thesis project and didn't get anywhere and had to switch project. So I decided, well, I don't have what it takes to become a successful scientist. So I went into law, which is perfect because I work on multiple projects at the same time, which is very exciting, which is what expected of me. And I never have to make the experiment work. So that's, it's you guys who can make the experiment work. So I have a deal to do. So that's awesome. But before we end, I just want to introduce my other partners. So my bio has been up for a while, and this is me. I do licensing work and transactions like I just talked about, but I actually have two awesome partners who are also on the line today. And Matt, let's see. Yeah, we don't have to show me anymore. Matt and Farish, who are both corporate partners in our Singapore office, so they're right there with you guys. And I really envy them. But they're in the good spot. So they both do corporate work. So if you're thinking of funding a company, getting a company financed, thinking about all the issues that you may encounter in terms of raising money, how much do I dilute? Do I raise seed, or do I go talk to people? Those are the folks who are there, who can actually talk to you and help you in that eco space. So here's Farish, and they're both on the line now, but here are, their contact information as well. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate Lila for all your time, as well as all the members from Cooley team. We definitely thank all of you for all the work done to get this webinar organized. Lastly, I just really like to thank the audience for your participation and some very interesting questions submitted beforehand. Also, if you'd like to learn firsthand is it like to start a company, do register for our next webinar, Spinning Out a Cancer Immunotherapy Startup, the story of Parax on 9th of September. Definitely, we will share the contacts from Cooley, and we really wished everyone a good Tuesday afternoon and have a great week ahead. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks
Lila.
for having us.
Thank you.